going to be reading from my memoir, Learning to be Irish, which is in prose, poetry and fiction. And it's about growing up in an Irish family in England in the 1960s and 70s. And here is from an early chapter. My parents met at a dance above the gas showrooms in Epsom in the mid-1950s. My father had come over to England from Mitchelstown, a small town in County Cork, in 1944. My mother from Ennistimon in County Clare in the early 50s. They married at St Clement's Church in Youghal, a Roman Catholic church. My mother in a blue suit, 5 months gone, after falling pregnant with my brother John, the first time she'd gone all the way with my father on an autumn day on Epsom Common. She had the flu on her wedding day and retreated from the reception early. Dad stayed on drinking. He started as he meant to go on. Mum and Dad stuck to their wedding vows until death did them part, 45 years on, despite not appearing to like each other, and went on to have 4 more children. I am in the middle, the filling in the sandwich, a sister and brother above me, a sister and brother below. Aged roughly 2 years apart, all 5 of us went to St Joseph's RC Primary School. The school was a United Nations of Spanish, Italian, Polish and Irish children, the progeny of economic migrants, come to work in the 7 hospitals that Epsom boasted at the time. These were the days when the people of London sent their troublesome relatives to the country, to asylums, those with severe psychiatric illnesses, or milk fever or other temporary disturbances that may have got better if they hadn't remained locked away for the rest of their lives, and those with what we then called mental handicap. My mother worked in West Park Hospital, which we called a mental hospital back then, as a nursing assistant, and many of my friends' parents also had jobs in the hospitals. My dad worked on the buildings, leaving in Uncle Bill's van before the rest of the house had risen, labouring on sites as long as there was daylight, long days in the summer months, sometimes returning home for dinner long after the rest of the family had eaten, his plate kept warm on top of a saucepan of hot water, an upturned plate over the meal so it looked like a flying saucer. If he had money, he'd go to the White Horse with Uncle Bill and the other men he worked with and come home long after the gravy had congealed on the plate, the meat shrivelled, the potatoes and vegetables dried up. We lived in a house allocated by the council after the prefab where I was born was deemed overcrowded. I was 4 when we arrived at the new house, the youngest of us a few months old, and that's where my parents lived out the rest of their lives, my brother John also ending his days there nearly 60 years after we all moved in. The small estate of post-war houses, pebble-dashed and painted white, all with the same front doors and windows nestled in an outer circle, with small roads branching in and out. There were few car owners and little traffic, and games of Red Rover, British Bulldog, and Please Mr Crocodile, may we cross your golden river in your golden boat, took place on the street, but not on the one green on the estate where the man lived who punctured footballs that fell into his garden. We lived amongst Sullivans, Corrigans, Regans and McLaughlins. We socialised with other Irish families at dances, weddings and parties. Coaches took us to the Irish dances at Surbiton Assembly Rooms, the women in long dresses, the men in suits, the girls in fancy dresses with new white socks which would be black on the soles by the end of the night from sliding across the polished floor in the lobby. The women would gather with handbags on the tables, the ash growing on cigarette ends as they talked. The men stood at the bar bringing Cinzano and lemonade for the women, Pepsi in glass bottles with straws for the children. Although many men joined in the set dances to the music of an Irish show band, Dad and Uncle Bill were not amongst them, but Mum and her sister Auntie Chris were never short of partners. We children joined in too, swept off our feet in the reels, dizzy as we were dropped back to the floor. I don't remember getting home. I must have been lifted asleep onto the coach and carried from the end of the road to our house, undressed and put to bed without waking. There were parties at home too. My mother was the eldest of 14, And quite apart from the brothers that came over from Ireland and stayed while they found work and somewhere to live, there were uncles in Acton, Auntie Chris, who lived near to us, and Auntie Bridget in Orpington. The Acton and Orpington contingents would arrive unannounced, with none of the families being on the phone, armed with loaves of bread, joints of meat, and bags of potatoes and vegetables. Auntie Bridget bringing not only her 6 children, but anyone else on her road that might want to tag along, plus her husband Matt and his brother, who wore a hat with a small feather in it, and whom we knew only as Fairy. Uncle Matt had a bald patch, until one day he hadn't. He arrived one Sunday sporting an ill-matched toupee, and was thereafter referred to as Uncle Matt on his head. Sometimes the gatherings were Sunday lunchtime to early evening. Other times the visitors would come on a Saturday and party into the night with Irish records on the dancette, singing and dancing. People would sleep wherever they found a space, only Chris and Bill returning home in the small hours. When Uncle Martin came from Acton, he would teach me Irish rebel songs as I sat on his knee, singing a line as he bounced me up and down, getting me to sing it back until the whole song stuck. "Now don't be singing those songs at school or to your English friends," he told me. He was the only one of the uncles who didn't drink alcohol, so he didn't join the men at the White Horse for the Sunday lunchtime session. He and Auntie Marie didn't have children, and Martin loved giving us treats. My parents didn't drive. Martin drove a lorry for a living and owned a Mini. "Who wants to go for a spin?" he'd ask, and as many of us as would fit piled into the car. He'd take us up to Epsom Downs and try to scare us by taking his hands off the steering wheel for a few seconds. As we got older, if a work trip took him close to Epsom, he'd park the lorry outside our house and take a couple of us with him. Sitting high in the cab above the traffic, he'd put me in charge of navigating, a map laid across my lap. There would be stops at Greasy Spoon cafes for strong tea, toast and jam. Then we'd arrive at the drop-off and stay in the cab while the lorry was unloaded. I could read before I started school, my big sister teaching me what she had been taught. It wasn't a household where we were read to by parents. There was no such thing as a bedtime story, except for those we girls made up at night and told each other in bed. The tale of the laughing machine gun and the crying revolver, the one about the witch who had a lift that went sideways as well as up and down, and imagining that there was a secret door from our room into the McLaughlin's house next door, so we could play with their children at night. My little sister was fond of telling us things that had happened to her when she was older, which often involved meeting an angel on the garden path as she was hanging out the washing, or having a son called Jonathan. We were not cuddled or kissed as children. The only physical contact was a brisk rub down with a towel after a bath on Sunday night, an impatient combing through of tangles in the girl's long wet hair, a fierce brushing to raise it into a ponytail for school the next morning. Baths were shared, or if I had the privilege of a solo soak, it would be in the water that another had bathed in, grey with the dregs of soap and shampoo. An even greater privilege was having the first bath. I loved it really hot, so I could hardly bear to step into it, and my skin turned scarlet. All that stopped once Pauline across the road fell into a bath she was filling, and ended up in hospital with burns. Cold water first became the rule. Falls and cuts were greeted with tutting, a far from gentle cleansing of the wound and applying a plaster, accompanied by Mum chanting, "Oh, you'll die!" There was a pot of black goo kept in a kitchen cupboard, once given on prescription to someone in the family, kept for years afterwards, marked the ointment. It was applied to every injury.